Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investments, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives to increase your wealth monetarily and educationally.
This is Fergus Hodgson with the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. It's always my privilege to be with you. And I'm excited about this week's show. We've got an author on, and I've read two of his latest books, which were wonderful, and I've reviewed both of them as well. The books that have come out are Speculator and Drug Lord, co-authored with Doug Casey. The other author of those books is John Hunt. John, welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast.
Thank you for having me on board.
Right, and as I said, I really enjoyed these books, and I hope more people will read them. I guess it's a slam dunk host today. John is a doctor, or medical physician, pediatrician, although he has left the field or the practice. I mean, he has a lengthy bio here, but he was, after let me say this, I'm reading here from highgroundseries.com, which is the website for the books. After 3 years of solo pediatric practice in Keflavik, Iceland, he undertook 2 concurrent subspecialty fellowships at the University of Virginia, where he received his tenure, which he later resigned as the U.S. medical system began its inevitable implosion. Okay, the first 2 books, Speculator, Drug Lord, and I don't know how many are going to be in the series, but as far as I know, the next one is Assassin. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's 6 or 7, probably will be 7 in the series, but we've got book 3, 4, and 5 all plotted out, and book 6 is, designed. So we've made great progress on that. Assassin is a little delayed just because I've got bound up at my end by some other complications. So it's a little bit delayed. We were shooting for 1 per year, but this one is going to take a little bit longer.
Sure. The last one, Drug Lord, was 481 pages, so lengthy, and it came out later last year. So I'm looking at my review was in November 2017, and I picked up the book at the New Orleans Investment Conference when Doug was there. Okay, I mean, there's a lot to go at here, and your own life story, I'm not sure what the best word is, intertwines with the books. And you note in your bio the implosion of the U.S. medical system. I see the U.S. medical system as just this, what is the best word? As a cartel, of course, and a racket. The way that Americans are so over-medicated is just baffling to me. But why don't you tell us what you mean by implosion? Has it already imploded or inevitable? What's this implosion going to look like?
Well, it's I think you could call it having imploded already, since it's so incredibly expensive and you don't get very much for your money. I think the price signals disappeared several decades back.
Yes.
And when you have no price signals, you lose your most important piece of information in an economic sector. And everything has just kind of spiraled into oblivion since then, so that prices now have absolutely no relationship to cost or to supply or to demand. And I mean, what possible functionality can you have in an economy at that point?
I don't know. I mean, some people don't seem to realize the importance of prices in allocating resources, but it seems like people in the industry, they recognize that higher prices, even if not directly revealed to the consumer or to the patient, benefit them. One important policy that I see as symptomatic or as significant, it explains a lot about the cartel aspects of the medical industry in the United States or medical system, is what are called Certificate of Need. That's it. CON laws. Mm-hmm. I think the majority of states, about half to maybe 2/3, have laws which basically say you cannot open a clinic or a hospital or any kind of medical office unless the rest of the guys agree to it. And you have to basically say why there needs to be one. And of course that doesn't make a lot of sense, because we all know that medical services are extremely expensive in the United States. How could there not be a need for it? But this is actually on the books in many states.
Right, and for MRIs and other major facilities, it was the government sticking its nose in trying to fix the problems it created. And it's not just in medicine. I entered this limousine and executive sedan and bus business
Yes.
in 1995 because it was so relative to my pharmaceutical company and the medical device companies. The limousine sedan business was so incredibly unregulated. But we had to get approval from all of the other competitors in town to be able to start our business because of some stupid state law. And I know stupid and state, they just go hand in hand. It's redundant. But yeah, this very strange stuff. And sure, it's in medicine too. It's just that there's still some free market left in the transportation world, whereas in the medical world, there is these little teeny wedges of free market that are starting to re-emerge here and there. But they're a teeny fraction, less than 1% of the system.
Right. Let's just clarify then. You were working as a pediatrician, and what particular aspects of your job just made it untenable to you or unacceptable?
I think it's that if you call me an ideologue, it's probably a dark phrase, but I try to think soundly, which is something that Doug and I've learned a lot from Doug about that. But the medical system was so unsound and so inconsistent, so many internal contradictions, that it was frustrating to work in, even though I was protected from the insurance world by being a faculty member at a university. And they tend to protect you from that. But even so, the way my brain works, the ethical construct of it, says I'm working for a crony system. You can call it a fascist system if you want to, but I think the more tenable word now is crony, and I don't like it. And then even the university system, which when I joined the University of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's university, the individualist, right? It very much was that way back in the late 90s. But in the mid-2000s, alongside the transition under the Bush presidency and then the Obama presidency, the university system, which had been faculty-focused, faculty-centered, meaning that the faculty provided the research, the faculty provided the clinical work, and the teaching, and therefore the division head would work for the faculty, and the department head would work for the division head, and then the dean would work for the department head, and the president would work for the deans. And there was this nice faculty-focused system that allowed us to do our work. And it may sound a little bit like, I want to be in charge, but it wasn't that. It was all just, it was all distributed. It was decentralized functioning at the university. But in about 2005, 2006, that started inverting. And all of a sudden, the faculty were working for the division head, who was working for the department head, who was working for the dean, who was working for the president of the university, who pretty much was doing whatever the president of the United States told him to do. And that became obvious to me by 2008, 2009. So this power inversion process.
So just basically, you had moral concerns, but in what ways did this line of authority impact your actual research or teaching?
Yeah, it's interesting how it inserts its way into the system where collectivism and top-down command and control starts inserting itself. I had a wonderful division head and a wonderful department head who were still desperately trying to protect the faculty members below to allow us to do our individual work and follow our paths that we thought would lead to the most productive outcomes. But they weren't able to defend against that over the years. And how exactly, it's hard to specifically say. It's the more intense work we spent on, setting up electronic medical records, where we all spent days and days learning the electronic medical records as opposed to teaching.
Just because electronic medical records were a federal mandate?
Because they're a federal mandate. And because the administration, if you've ever seen that wonderful chart of the rate of growth of physicians in this country versus the rate of growth of the hospital administrators, it's a shocking chart. It's a tenfold difference.
What do these people do all day? I don't understand.
Yeah, they make rules, and then they follow the rules, and then they enforce the rules, and then they tell others to be fearful of the rules, and then they make more rules.
It's a bit like, I went to college on an athletic scholarship, and you would be amazed as to, in college athletics departments, how many administrators there are relative to how many coaches there are. It's insane. Over time, the administrators have come to overwhelm the number of actual coaches.
Yeah, and that's an interesting insight that I wasn't aware of. I mean, academic institutions, and certainly academic medical institutions where I was, are not known for their efficiency because they're, mostly publicly funded or funded by the clinical revenue, which is totally hyperinflating. So there's not a lot of financial controls that are in place that are the result of any kind of free market stuff.
And was there I mean, I assume that this was very lucrative work. Was there a point where you just said, what was the threshold moment where you said, I'm going to let it go?
First, it wasn't all that per se lucrative. I was a academic pediatric pulmonologist, so the pediatricians are pretty much the lowest paid of the medical fields. The pulmonologists are pretty much the lowest specialty, and academia is low pay. So,
Okay.
but what I had was my freedom. I had the freedom to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and that's why I went to academic, because I wanted to do research and I wanted to have my freedom. And then when the top-down inversion happened, that freedom disappeared, or was gradually disappearing. The writing was on the wall with Obamacare, particularly. So, and that's why I pulled my way out to go back for my freedom. And it wasn't going to happen in private practice, because those folk are really struggling. They're not necessarily struggling financially, but they're struggling morally, ethically.
For more than 40 years, top financial experts and private investors from all over the world have gathered for the New Orleans Investment Conference to discover new opportunities and strategies, exchange ideas, and plan for the coming year. To learn more about today's investing environment and updates, join Mark Skousen, Peter Schiff, Brian London, Robert Kiyosaki, Doug Casey, and dozens of other experts at this year's event from the 1st to the 4th of November. Go to NewOrleansConference.com to register today.
Yeah, man, we're getting a little bit away from your books, but I mean, I guess this was relevant to the second edition, Drug Lord. But in terms of the private practice in the United States, how do these individuals, how are they impacted by this? Do you think just by? I mean, I always see or believe there's over medication. Is that what you're referring to?
No, not so much that. The transition from being independent professional practitioners to being employees of the system. So the doctors now, more than 50% are employees now, and they are working for the administrators, and the administrators, well, this is a collectivist statement, but for the most part, they have their heads way up their butts, and they don't have the moral positioning of the medical doctor who has the noble profession and the noble idea of helping the individual patient. The administrators are thinking collectively. And the insurance companies, well, by their very nature, are collectives. They profit from the success of the collective, not from the individual success. So these insurance companies we've inserted this collective insurance company mentality into the relationship that's very individual between a doctor and a patient. And it's fouled it all up. And that is, the core problem is not just that insurance creates a third-party payer problem where the patient and the doctor don't give a damn what things costs, but also it inserts this collectivist mentality into what should be an individualist situation, and that just fails.
I mean, there's just so much to say about this topic because it's just an ongoing pain in the U.S. economy. This is one reason why many people can't quit their jobs, for example, because they're afraid to lose their medical insurance, or they want to work for the government because the state medical insurance will be more generous than a private employer can offer. And entrepreneurs who want to build a startup or a small company, they can't afford this. It's just it's too small, of course, so it puts them at a great competitive disadvantage. And it's just something that's been particularly concerning to me because I've sought to be more independent and not an employee for a long time. And dealing with the U.S. medical system would I live in Guatemala, of course, so it's so much cheaper here. Okay, but so you've left the profession.
I left it, but I still keep my finger in it in various ways, but yes.
Okay, so yeah, author and entrepreneur, and this is how I came across you, or came across your work, because I've followed Doug Casey for a long time. And I read the first book, which is devoted to, it's like, I'm not sure, it's fiction, but with a lot of truth peppered in there. And speculator, so it actually is, for someone wanting to learn the life of someone who's like prospecting for gold, it's a very interesting outline. So do you share Doug's interest in mining or natural resources?
No, that wasn't my primary interest when I embarked on this. I was interested. I was a geology major in college, and so I had a kind of a clue. But the shared interest that we had in that particular book was my time in Africa and in West Africa and working with these people and kind of getting a feel for it. And so when he and I got together to write Speculator, it was very much a combined thing. His experience in Africa, my experience in Africa, his experience with mining, my experience with geology, and it all kind of came together into Speculator. His ideas are extremely dominant in the book.
Okay.
Yeah, we wrote this thing together. I can't tell what he wrote, and he can't tell what I wrote anymore. It's completely blurred.
Sure. And I'll just say that, I will include links to my reviews because I tried to extract what I thought were the most important themes. And my headline was, Fiction Has a New Libertarian Hero. And that hero, the character in the book, was Charles Knight. The subtitle was, Speculator Charles Knight is Rugged Individualism Personified. And that's what makes the book so distinct to me, is that there's such a great deal of pride in this noble individual who just follows his own moral compass. What is there are so many themes in these books, but obviously it's more than just a story. The story, there's a great deal of entertainment in there, but you have a clear message. Do you want to clarify what that message is?
Yeah, I think you've got the handle on it, which is, what is the evolution of internal evolution of a man who is internally sound, who's a moral agent, and who is above all things moral. And how did he get that way? And he's got a big head start by the time he's 23 in Speculator. He's already got a whole chunk of that, but he's still going to be foolish in many ways, and he's got tons to learn. And so in Speculator, he recognizes for the real first time in his life that, or at least it gets reinforced, that there are evil people in the world, and dark people who just, they're sociopaths and others, and he has to really learn that lesson head on. He'd had a little bit of previous stuff from a lemonade stand where he got...
Oh, that's right, yeah. I remember that part of the story.
And it goes on from there. In each book, he's going to be learning new lessons and trying new angles to eliminate these dark forces which keep on interfering with his freedom.
That's one of the toughest aspects of humanity or the world, that for many of us to accept as we grow up. I grew up on a sheep and cattle farm in New Zealand, this idyllic environment. And when I was 19, I got a scholarship to go to the United States. And then when I was in my mid-20s, I went out a bit like Charles, looking for fame and fortune. And I just had many bad experiences. I had to come to grips with the fact that the world was not as idyllic as what I'd grown up with. In this case, too, Charles is dealing with... he goes to Africa in the first book. He's dealing with these just totally different cultural ways, and most of them are not necessarily positive. They're just people surviving in the scenarios that they're living in. And then, I'm not going to give too much of the actual story away, but in the second book, you bring him back to the United States. And this one, it's not related to mining or to finance so much, but it is related to maybe your profession and experience. You studied in Washington, D.C. That's where most of the action takes place. So why did you bring it back to D.C.? Why did you bring it back to D.C.? And do you want to clarify maybe the pivotal elements of that story that make it compelling or interesting?
Well, it's Doug's original series of books. The outline for them was Speculator first, and then Drug Lord. Now, and then I came in to be helping at the beginning of the series, of course, and Drug Lord to me had multiple components to it, multiple layers to it. And because I worked in pharmaceuticals, I owned my own I still own my own startup pharmaceutical company, and worked against or with the FDA and the DEA. So I had these the notion that the pharmaceutical industry itself is pretty much, they're just drug lords with good lobbyists in Washington. And how to combine those and compare and contrast the so-called legal pharmaceutical business with the illegal black market drug business, and which one of those is actually more moral. And that's what the nature of the Drug Lord book is about, is comparing those, as well as advancing Charles's growth. He's 7 years older in Drug Lord, and he learns in Drug Lord that it's not just people who are bad, but systems that are bad, and that he has to fight against systems like the FDA and the DEA in order to accomplish his goals. And we get to talk about truth as well, and what is the nature of truth, and what prevents us from seeing truth in that book too, just by the drug that we chose to develop.
Right. My sense is that the second book will be more understandable or relatable to the American audience, just because the first book, it takes people on a journey to Africa. I mean, I just like you, I've spent plenty of time in Washington, D.C. and those areas, and so reading about it in the book is so, it's kind of close to home. And one of my friends works in one of these federal agencies, so, it's all about it. Yeah, so why don't you talk a bit about whether I mean, maybe this is a sensitive topic, but whether sales have met your targets, or how well, what kind of reaction have you gotten from these books?
Oh, I think it's been positive. It's not. We haven't made a Star Wars movie out of them yet. Steven Spielberg hasn't been knocking on the door, but we've had reasonable good sales for guys who are basically self-published. We are self-published. High Ground Books is our own publishing company, and we published through that. We thought about getting an agent. We talked to. We have a friend who's a pretty top agent who just thinks that the traditional publishing world is in a rapid decline, and they don't offer nearly as much to you as they tend to take away now.
Okay.
And we had Doug's name and Doug's publicity pathways, so we went the self-publishing well. It's also more libertarian to do so. We've sold, tens of thousands of each book, which isn't great for high success, but it's pretty darn good for self-publishing, which I think the average number of sales is like 50. So,
yeah.
And they keep on building on each other. Of course, we're both doing this part-time, and we could probably put more effort into our marketing, but we'll keep on plugging and chugging and seeing what we can do.
Well, I guess part of it is a passion project that maybe for you it's a way to just release some frustration that you have with your own business and career life.
I suppose that's partly true.
Is it therapeutic? I mean,
I love writing. I do love writing it and coming up and working with the plots, and it's fun. But as actually what's the biggest reward for me has been working with Doug, because we go back and forth on these. There was 73 back and forths in Speculator and 69 for Drug Lord, and we go back and we learn how each other thinks by doing that back and forth process. And I've really learned how he thinks, and basically we think a lot alike. I mean, the way our brains work, the same stimuli tends to lead to the same responses, which allows us to write together, I think, very well.
Yeah, that process can require a great deal of patience and flexibility, dealing with two basically equally. I mean, I assume you're both on equal footing in the production of the book, so no one really has the final say, and so there needs to be a great deal of patience. And I just know of other books that have failed at the final hurdle because of disagreements. Yeah.
I think that Doug and I have we tend not to disagree much, and when we do, we work through it pretty quickly. I wouldn't want to write books with anybody else, that's for sure, because it really is important that, for me at least, it's very important that we be able to think alike but still have diverse experiences that synergize with each other, but also that we have the same moral grounding. And because I think writing a book with somebody who had some kind of significantly alternative moral foundation would be horrifying to me.
Okay, so the next book is Assassin, and you said I guess it should have been out, assuming a yearly release about now. Do you have any timetable?
I think the only guarantee I can give you on that is that whatever date I say will be wrong. We have a lot more to do of editing and the like, and I just had some personal stuff with an ill family member that has blocked me from doing my share, and that has resolved sadly, and we are going to be putting my effort fully back into getting this thing going. So I would guess spring sometime we'll get this out.
Sure.
And we'll just forgive me, and we'll move on. The next book, though, will come maybe fast on its heels, because actually that book was written, book 4 was written several years ago, and book 5 also.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's just it's tweaking it, adjusting it, but the plots are all there, the characters' development is all there. And we basically wrote them all in 1 year, and then the initial drafts all in 1 year, except for book 6, which is only partly touched, because we had to know the whole storyline.
Yes, to make things, because you've got to tie everything back together, and that's one thing I find almost hard to comprehend, that these stories go in so many directions, but then they seem to fit, right? Which is no easy task. In terms of an impact, though, I mean, as I said, these obviously have a great deal of, they have strong messages to them. In the case with me, obviously you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I believe in the rugged individualism that I describe. And in the second book, I describe the drug lord as the good rebel, which is a character who rebels against the system, but not just for the sake of rebelling, but because he really has a strong conviction. Do you see these books actually changing anyone's views?
I think that's a hope, and as Doug would say, hope is halfway between hell and height. But how can we change anybody's views? I think my hope, if I have a hope, it's that they will be read by younger people before they've been fully indoctrinated by the academic system, and serve as an inoculation against the collectivist infection, which I have increasingly begun, even though it was a fanciful notion on our part in Speculator, that collectivism is a contagious infection, contagious disease. I think the reality is that collectivism is a contagious disease. It spreads in groups. It spreads in groups where they mass online. It spreads in religious mobs or political mobs. And it's a disease because it kills more humans and causes more morbidity and mortality than anything else I can think of, more than TB, more than malaria. Collectivism is a horrible disease. So why not call it what it is? It's a contagious disease. And that is something that I want to be able to inoculate people against. And the way to inoculate them is to get them when they're younger before they've been infected so thoroughly.
Right. Okay, well, folks, you've got to check these books out. 2 of them are available, and both different but great reads, entertaining, and with plenty of controversial messaging or challenging themes in them. So the website is highgroundseries.com, but as always, you can find these at goldnewsletter.com/podcast. John, I mean, we could speak for a lot longer. I've really enjoyed chatting with you and hearing your thoughts. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. And keep an eye out on internationalman.com if I can put a plug in there, because
Sure.
Doug and Joel Bauman and Doug and I run that now, just the 3 of us. And we'll be putting out information on the next book on internationalman.com too.
That's great. Okay, we'll be in touch.
Great. Thank you so much. Enjoyed being on the show.